The house stood on 112 Ocean Avenue, Amityville, Long Island. Its gambrel roof, like half-closed eyes, seemed to watch the street with a silent, brooding menace. The white paint on the walls had long since lost its brightness, dulled by the sea air and decades of whispers. Neighbors crossed the street when passing by, pretending not to notice the for sale sign that had gathered dust and rusted nails. It was November 1974 when the first tragedy struck. The DeFeo family, parents Ronald and Louise, and their 5 children, were found shot to death in their beds. Each had been executed with a .35 caliber rifle while they slept. No one in the neighborhood had heard gunfire. No one had seen anything unusual. The killer, their eldest son, Ronald DeFeo Jr., confessed that voices from within the house had urged him to do it. For months afterward, the house remained silent. Realtors tried to sell it, but potential buyers would often step inside, only to flee minutes later, pale and trembling. It wasn't just the memory of the murders, it was the feeling. The air felt wrong, thick with something unseen. A year later, in December 1975, George and Kathy Lutz bought the house for a shockingly low price. They were a young couple with 3 children, eager to start fresh. George, a businessman with a confident grin, believed they could turn the haunted reputation into a blessing. "It's just a house," he told Kathy as they signed the papers. "Brick and wood can't hold ghosts." But Kathy wasn't convinced. From the moment they drove up the long driveway, she felt a chill, as though the house had been waiting for them. When she looked up at the attic windows, she thought she saw a face staring down, a brief flicker of pale skin and hollow eyes. She blinked, and it was gone. Moving day was bitterly cold. The movers complained about the temperature inside the house. It seemed to drop suddenly, as if the walls were exhaling frost. The children, Danny, Chris, and little Missy, explored the rooms, laughing and chasing each other, until Missy stopped at a small room behind the stairs. "Who's Jody?" she asked suddenly. Kathy turned. "Who, honey?" "Jody," Missy said with a shy smile. "She lives here too. She says she doesn't like when people move her things." George and Kathy exchanged uneasy glances. They assumed it was an imaginary friend. Every child had one, they reasoned. But later that night, when Missy pointed to the corner of her room and said, "Jody's watching," Kathy felt her skin prickle. That first night, George couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned, sweating under the blankets, though the room was freezing. At precisely 3:15 a.m., he awoke to a loud thud downstairs. He grabbed his robe and descended the staircase, flashlight in hand. The living room was empty, but the door to the boathouse was swinging open, letting in the icy wind from the canal. He shut it, locked it, and muttered something about drafts. But when he turned back, he saw muddy footprints on the floor, small ones, like those of a child, leading away from the door toward the stairs. By morning, Kathy found him sitting at the table, pale and unshaven, staring into his untouched coffee. "I must have been dreaming," he said. But when she followed his gaze to the footprints still faintly visible on the floorboards, her stomach turned. That day, the priest arrived. Father Mancuso, a family friend, had agreed to bless the house. As he sprinkled holy water in the upstairs bedrooms, he paused suddenly in one of the rooms, the one that had once belonged to the murdered DeFeo boys. The air turned heavy. His breath came out in white clouds. Then a voice, deep, guttural, and close, growled right into his ear, "Get out." The priest stumbled back, clutching his crucifix. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. "Hear what?" Kathy asked, frowning. He didn't answer. He simply crossed himself, hurried out of the house, and drove away without looking back. That evening, as the Lutz family gathered for dinner, the phone rang. Kathy answered. Silence. Only static. Then, faintly, she heard a voice, low and rasping. "Get out." The line went dead. George looked at her, confused. "Who was it?" Kathy swallowed hard. "I don't know." Outside, the wind rose, whistling through the cracks of the old house, as if the walls themselves were whispering the same. The next morning began deceptively normal. Sunlight spilled through the lace curtains of the kitchen, painting soft golden shapes on the counter. Kathy tried to shake off the unease from the night before. She made pancakes, humming softly, while the children argued playfully over syrup. George sat at the table, silent, nursing his fourth cup of coffee. His eyes were bloodshot, his face pale. "You didn't sleep again, did you?" Kathy asked. George rubbed his temples. "Couldn't. The house, it creaks all night. Feels like someone's walking around." Kathy frowned. "It's an old place, George." Wood settles. He didn't respond, but inside he knew it wasn't the house settling. He had heard footsteps, deliberate, slow, moving from the hallway to the nursery. Each creak had been too intentional, too heavy to be random. That afternoon, George decided to fix the basement heater, hoping work would distract him. As he descended the stairs, he noticed how damp and cold it felt below. The walls glistened with condensation, and the faint smell of rot filled the air. When he opened the furnace panel, he froze. Scratched into the metal, in uneven letters, were the words, "Catch them before they see." He blinked, ran his hand over it, and the scratches were gone. Only smooth steel remained. George stepped back, heart racing. Was he losing his mind? Upstairs, Kathy was cleaning Missy's room when she noticed something strange. Missy was sitting on the floor, humming softly to herself. "Who are you talking to, sweetheart?" Kathy asked. Missy pointed toward the window. "Jody says it's her turn to play." Kathy followed her finger, expecting to see an empty corner. Instead, her heart nearly stopped. For a split second, reflected in the glass, she saw the shape of a large, shadowy pig with glowing red eyes. She screamed, but when she turned around, the room was empty. Missy looked at her calmly, tilting her head. "You scared Jody," she said. That night, George woke again at 3:15 a.m., the same time as before. This time, the sound wasn't from downstairs. It was inside the walls. A scratching, faint at first, then louder, like nails dragging along wood. He pressed his ear to the paneling. Something moved. Not rats, not pipes, but something alive. He grabbed a hammer and pried open a section of the wall. Dust spilled out. Behind the wood, he found a hollow space like a hidden cavity. He aimed his flashlight inside and gasped. A small, crude shrine sat there, built of bones, melted candles, and a black crucifix turned upside down. A foul stench hit him like a wave. He stumbled back, gagging. When Kathy found him minutes later, he was on his knees, pale and trembling. "What happened?" she cried. George pointed, but when she looked, the wall was intact. Not a single board displaced. "I swear," he stammered, "there was something there. A shrine or... "George, you need sleep," Kathy whispered. But even as she said it, she noticed the air had turned icy again, her breath visible in front of her face. The next day, Kathy called Father Mancuso, desperate for reassurance. But when the priest answered, his voice was weak, trembling. "You must leave that house," he said. "Now. Don't wait. What's happening?" she asked. "You know something?" "The voice," he interrupted. "It followed me home. I've fallen ill since the blessing. Fever, blisters. I can't breathe inside a church anymore." "That house isn't haunted, Mrs. Lutz. It's possessed." The line crackled and went dead. That evening, George's behavior worsened. He grew irritable, snapping at the children, pacing constantly, obsessed with the fireplace. "It's cold," he muttered again and again. "We need more wood." He spent hours chopping logs outside in the snow, his hands blistered, sweat freezing in his beard. Kathy watched from the window, her fear deepening with every passing hour. This wasn't the man she'd married. Meanwhile, small things in the house began to move on their own. Crosses turned upside down. Doors slammed when no one was near. The toilets filled with black sludge. The stench of decay clung to the air, impossible to clean away. One afternoon, Danny ran screaming from the bathroom. "Mom!" The door locked. I couldn't breathe. When Kathy checked, the lock was broken, rusted from the inside, though it had worked moments before. At night, the sounds inside the walls grew louder. Sometimes George heard whispering, chanting in a language he couldn't understand. The same phrase repeated again and again until it crawled into his dreams. And then one night, as he stared at the firelight flickering across the walls, he thought he saw something move within the flames, faces, distorted, screaming, twisting in agony. He blinked, and they were gone. Kathy touched his shoulder. "George?" He turned toward her, his eyes hollow. "They don't want us here," he whispered. But it's too late. They've already found us outside. The wind howled down Ocean Avenue, a sound that almost but not quite resembled laughter. The third week in the Amityville house began with a storm. Rain battered the windows and thunder rolled over the Long Island Sound like the growl of something ancient and awake. Inside, the air was so heavy it felt alive. The walls seemed to pulse, as though the house itself were breathing in rhythm with the storm. George hadn't slept in days. His beard had grown wild. His eyes sunk deep into shadows. He no longer went to work. He claimed the house needed him. He spent hours tending to the fire, muttering under his breath. Kathy barely recognized him anymore. One night, she woke to the sound of George talking in the living room. She crept down the stairs quietly, afraid to startle him. But what she saw froze her in place. George sat before the fireplace, staring into the flames. His lips moved slowly, whispering a string of words she couldn't understand. The fire burned unnaturally bright, green and blue tongues of flame twisting into faces that grinned and vanished. "George," she whispered. He turned his head sharply. His eyes gleamed red in the firelight. "They're cold," he said. "They want warmth." Kathy's breath caught. "Who?" He blinked, and for a second, the madness cleared. I don't know," he stammered. "I keep hearing them. Voices in the fire, in the walls. They keep saying my name." That night, the voices came for Kathy too. She awoke at 3:15 a.m., the cursed hour, to the sound of children crying. Thinking it was one of her own, she ran to their rooms. But Danny and Chris were fast asleep. Missy, however, was standing by her window again, whispering softly. "Jody says the family in the basement doesn't like us," Missy said, without turning around. Kathy felt her blood turn cold. "What family?" "The ones Daddy hears," she replied. "They're not gone yet. They live in the dark." And next morning, Kathy noticed a strange smell seeping from the basement. Something metallic and rotten. When she opened the door, the scent was overwhelming. She covered her mouth and called George. Together, they descended the steps, flashlights cutting through the darkness. The cement floor was wet, slick like oil. Then Kathy gasped. On the wall, written in a dark, dripping substance, were the words, "March 15, kill them." George wiped at it with a rag, but it smeared like fresh blood. He backed away, shaking his head. "It's a prank," he said weakly. "It has to be." Kathy wasn't convinced. "Who would come in here to play a prank? The doors are locked, George. The windows are nailed shut." That evening, the voices grew louder. They came from the vents, the ceiling, even from the floor beneath their feet. Whispers and murmurs, rising and falling like waves. Sometimes it sounded like laughter, sometimes like screaming. Father Mancuso tried once more to contact them. His voice on the phone was barely audible. "You must listen to me," he said. "That house, it was built on cursed ground. Before the DeFeos, before anyone, there was a native burial site there. I think it's something older than any of us can understand." George interrupted, desperate. "How do we make it stop?" The priest hesitated. "You can't. You can only leave the line filled with static." And then, faintly, a deep growl. "He's ours." The phone burst into sparks and went dead. That night, George found himself drawn to the basement again. The smell was stronger now. When he turned on the light, he saw movement, a shadow sliding across the far wall. He took a step closer, his flashlight trembling. The beam caught something carved into the concrete. A small hole, barely 2 feet wide. Inside it, darkness swirled like smoke. He leaned closer, and a hand shot out, grabbing his wrist. George screamed and fell backward, slamming against the steps. The light flickered and died. He scrambled to his feet and ran upstairs, slamming the door behind him. But when Kathy found him moments later, the skin on his wrist was burned, as if something had branded him. "George," she cried, "what happened?" He stared at the wound. The shape of it, unmistakable, was the outline of a hoof. That night, the entire house seemed to awaken. Doors banged open and shut. The walls groaned. Black ooze seeped from the keyholes. And above it all, faint at first but growing stronger, came a chorus of voices, whispering, chanting, weeping. Missy sat upright in her bed, eyes wide. "They're angry," she said softly. They don't want us here. Kathy clutched her daughter close, trembling. Who's angry, baby? The ones in the walls, Missy whispered. They want Daddy to finish what the other man started. Kathy turned to look at George. He was standing in the doorway, eyes glazed, his lips moving soundlessly, repeating the same words over and over. March 15th, kill them. By the start of the 4th week, the Lutz family was unraveling. The once cozy home had become a living nightmare, a maze of flickering lights, sudden drafts, and whispering shadows. No one slept. The children cried through the night, and George's temper exploded over the smallest things. Kathy could feel something, not just a presence, but a will pressing down on them all. The morning began with a scream. Kathy rushed to the bathroom to find Danny staring at the mirror, shaking. Across his chest, faint red welts had appeared, words carved as if by invisible hands. You stay, you die. Kathy pulled him into her arms, sobbing. It's okay, baby. It's okay, she whispered, though her voice trembled with fear. She looked up at the mirror again and saw her own reflection. Only it wasn't her. The face staring back had hollow eyes and a mouth stretched into an inhuman grin. The reflection whispered, he's almost ready. Kathy stumbled backward, grabbing her crucifix. She ran downstairs and found George chopping wood outside again, shirtless despite the freezing air. His eyes were vacant, his movements mechanical, like a man possessed. George, please come inside, she begged. We need to leave this house. He looked at her as though he didn't recognize her. We can't, he muttered. It won't let us. That night, Kathy made up her mind. She would take the children and go to her sister's house. But as she packed their bags, every light in the house went out at once. A deep vibration filled the air, like a growl from beneath the floor. The windows began to rattle, the walls trembling as if the house itself were waking up. Then came the laughter, high-pitched, echoing from every corner. The children screamed. Kathy grabbed Missy, pulling her close. George, help me, she cried. He came running, but stopped dead halfway down the stairs. Every crucifix in the house, every single one, was now hanging upside down. The air stank of sulfur and rot. Then, from the living room, a shadow began to take form, thick and black, with eyes that gleamed red like coals. Who are you? Kathy screamed. The shadow pulsed, shifting into a human-like shape, tall, skeletal, its grin stretching impossibly wide. This is my house, it hissed, voice echoing from everywhere at once. You live here because I allow it, but it had pointed a long, crooked finger toward George. He belongs to me. George clutched his head, crying out in pain. Stop it. Get out of my mind. Kathy tried to run to him, but the force threw her back against the wall. The children cried, covering their ears as the sound of the house grew deafening. Doors slamming, glass shattering, voices screaming over each other. In that chaos, Kathy saw something. Faint figures flickering in the darkness. The DeFeo family. Their bodies pale, eyes blank, mouths open in silent screams. One of them, a boy, reached out to her. Help us, he whispered. It wants blood. It feeds on hate. Then, as suddenly as it began, the noise stopped. Silence fell. The lights flickered back on. The shadows were gone. Kathy crawled to George, shaking him. He was cold to the touch, his skin slick with sweat. George, please, she whispered. Look at me. Slowly, he turned his head. His eyes were dark, unfocused. It said, I have to finish it, he murmured. Finish what? The cleansing, he said, voice flat. They all have to die. Then it'll stop. Kathy slapped him hard across the face. Listen to yourself. That's not you talking. He blinked rapidly, confusion flickering in his gaze. I don't know what's happening, he whispered, trembling. That night, Kathy locked the children in her room, too afraid to sleep. Around 3:15 a.m., she heard George moving downstairs again, the sound of the front door creaking open. She grabbed a flashlight and followed. Outside, the air was bitter cold, the moon half hidden behind clouds. She found him standing at the boathouse, staring into the dark water. His reflection rippled below him, twisted into something demonic. George, she said softly. He didn't move. "I can hear them down there," he said finally. "Calling my name." She stepped closer. "There's no one there." He turned to her then, eyes glowing faintly red in the moonlight. "You don't understand. The house chose me. It showed me the truth." "What truth?" "That this place was never a home," he said. "It's a gate." Kathy felt her heart seize. "A gate to what?" "To hell," he whispered. Then before she could move, the wind howled, the water churned, and from the depths of the boathouse, a voice rose. The same voice that had haunted her dreams. "March 15th, kill them." Kathy screamed and dragged George back toward the house, both slipping on the icy dock. The air vibrated with laughter, echoing from the water, the trees, even the sky. As they stumbled inside, the clock struck 3:15, and every door in the house slammed shut.